Good afternoon and welcome to Maintaining MomenTAM, the webinar here of the Federal Transit Administration. Thank you for joining us. My name is Eric Papetti. I am the Acting TAM Program Manager, and I just wanted to welcome you all and kick off the meeting before we get to our main presenters. Next slide. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure you all are aware of a couple of good things. First of all, we have scheduled our TAM Roundtable for 2021. It will be a virtual event, as it was last year, and will be taking place on June 22nd. So please save the date. We have a webpage for that up on the main TAM webpage right now. You can go back to that to find a registration link over the coming next couple of weeks. The next thing I wanted to highlight for everyone is the updated narrative report template, which is also now available on the TAM webpage. We hope that this will be a new and valuable resource for you all as you prepare your narrative report submissions for the coming year. You can find that right now. Please let us know if you have any questions about that. Next slide, please. We are about to hear from presenters from two different agencies speaking about their experiences with maintaining MomenTAM over the last year. Once we are done hearing those presentations, we will have a question and answer period where we will be able to field questions for them. The first agency we wanted to mention was Denver RTD. We have with us today Lou Cripps. Lou Cripps is the Senior Manager of Asset Management for the Regional Transportation District in Denver, Colorado. RTD is a multimodal agency serving a population of over 2.9 million people across 2,300 square miles. He is a current co-chair for APTA's Performance-Based Planning Subcommittee, the Institute of Asset Management Colorado chapter, and co-author of Building and Asset Management Team. Once we hear from him, we will be hearing from Casco Bay. With us today from Casco Bay is Pottle. Paul is the Director of Projects for Casco Bay Lines, where he oversees all of Casco Bay Lines' capital project work and assists with contracting efforts associated with procurement. Prior to joining Casco Bay Lines in 2016, Paul worked for an engineering firm for 5 years, where he focused on marine infrastructure, and before that, Paul served as an assistant program manager and a project manager with the Maine Department of Transportation for 30 years, with a focus on all alternative modes of transportation, especially in the marine area. Paul has had an association with Casco Bay Lines for his entire career in various roles. During the Q&A section, we will be joined by Hank Berg. Hank is the current General Manager and CEO of Casco Bay Lines. He joined the district in January of 2010. Previously, Hank worked 9 years at Taction, a Maine-based premier customer service contact center representing some of the country's most trusted brands. Hank served in the roles of President, Chief Operating Officer, and Chief Financial Officer during his tenure. Prior to Taction, Hank served for more than 20 years in the high-tech industry at Transcept, a startup firm, and Sanders, a Lockheed Martin company. Thank you all for being with us here today. We can move on to the next slide, and we look forward to hearing from Lou.
So I thought I'd start off today kind of setting the stage. I'd like to maybe start with a question. The question is basically, did your 2020 feel like this? We all experienced dramatic reductions in our service levels due to the pandemic. Frankly, I think this might have lasting impacts on public transit, with working from home becoming more prevalent. Also, we saw real reduced service and revenues, which naturally kind of forced us to talk about budget cuts and layoffs. RTD also experienced some outside scrutiny from an appointed accountability committee as we transferred the leadership to a new CEO. And with all this, we're still facing continued pressure to expand and build another rail line. So my guess is that most folks on the call have experienced similar situations, some different challenges, regardless of the size of your agency. We're all facing some real challenges this year. So in this next slide, we'll talk about how COVID changed transit asset management. So actually, did COVID change transit asset management? My answer is no, right? The constraints still exist within public transportation, right? Our needs always outweigh our resources. So back in 2016, the Federal Register said that SDR grants would not be enough to address the backlog, that we wouldn't have enough resources, and that's been true for many years, right? This next statement on the bottom left there, it's also 5 years old, but it sure looks to me like it could have been written yesterday, that we need to be more strategic, right? In these fiscally constrained times, transit agencies will need to be more strategic in the use of available funds. I think that's more true now than ever. And then when we look on the right side here, MAP 21 also introduced this idea of stewardship and a call for change, right? It makes sense to take care of stuff we have first, right? There's an underlying message here that I'm not sure anyone really wants to say out loud, so I will, right? That's public transit's best thinking has produced $90 billion of backlog. So we can safely assume that we have to evolve or change, right? Change the way we do business to get a different result, or at least at a minimum, kind of stop the backlog growth. So following a plan, especially in the time of crisis, ensures that we continue to evolve. So that takes me into the next slide here, which is this momentum. I'm struggling with the emphasis here, but it's momentum amid a crisis, right? We've already covered the idea that 2020 was rough for everyone, but it didn't change the need to be more strategic with our available funding. Then I'm going to talk just a little bit about why we should trust our plans, the TAM plans that we all developed. And then finally, I'm going to kind of apply it to RTD. I'll share a story of how we used our plan to maintain momentum amidst this crisis. Just one side note here. All I'm going to cover today, I think is applicable, whether you're a tier 1, a tier 2, a group TAM plan sponsor, or participant. The only difference maybe is the level of detail or how much resolution we need in those plans. So on this next slide, we have to trust our plan, or maybe more appropriately, why we should trust the plan. So let's talk about that. Next slide. So I think a lot of agencies see TAM plan as a compliance exercise, but if the goal is to evolve, it should be viewed as a coordination of activities or a management system framework. So if we look at this here, a management system is the way in which an organization manages the interrelated parts of its business in order to achieve its objectives. We all want that. Like, that's our goal. So in my opinion, the TAM plan, and more specifically, element number 9 listed on the left here, it's included in all fundamental components of any management system framework. And if we just look down this list, what assets do we own? What condition are those assets in? How do we make investment decisions around those assets? What is the result of our decision-making process? What are our guiding principles? How do we integrate asset management into our organizations? What are the things that we need to do on an annual basis for TAM, right? That's our key annual activities. And then who's going to do it, right? What resources is it going to take to keep TAM alive? And then this element number 9, and then did we get the results we set out to achieve, right? If not, you got to rinse and repeat, right? I cannot think of a time where these elements didn't matter, but they matter more now than ever. So if we go on to this next slide, this is what it looks like at RTD. So the evaluation plan, or continuous improvement, is just a plan, do, check, act cycle. It's part of all management system frameworks, right? In the case of asset management, we sometimes, we use the 39 subjects or the ISO 55000 framework, but again, it's why is continual improvement important? And it's, remember from the previous slide that the management system is the way in which our organizations manage the interrelated parts in order to achieve our objectives, right? So what happens when our constraints, but not our objectives or our purpose change? This is where these management systems, like we have to lean on that framework, right? That leveraging that continual improvement element is so beneficial. As the needs of our customers changed, right, we can systematically adapt to the change with that evaluation plan step. I'm going to get more into how RTD does that. We use that kind of those elements you see going down the right side of this slide.
Yep. You're on mute or whatever, and you'll have a great time.
So now I'm going to kind of make a leap here, and I'm going to say or assume that the FTA, they're planning on our 2022 TAM plans being different than our 2020 or 2018 TAM plans. We've seen a lot of change, right? So for continual improvement at RTD, we use that word synonymous with a generational approach. In the next slide, I'm going to show you that example, how it works at RTD. So this next slide here, this is the best example of a generational approach I could come up with, and this is our TAM plan. So RTD is currently working on the 4th iteration of our TAM plan. So why are we taking this approach? By the time we finished our 2018 TAM, we already thought of ways to improve it. So we updated the plan again in 2019 and then again in October of 2020. Each year we were able to make some incremental improvements. We didn't throw it out, not a wholesale change, but we just keep doing that next right thing. So our intent was to keep the plan as current as possible to ensure that it remained relevant, right? And it was at the front of everyone's mind, because 2020 has shown, I think, all of us that a lot can happen in 12 months, right? So if we look at this from our perspective here at RTD, the primary output of the TAM plan is a prioritized list of investments. It's our AMP. There are, of course, many other advantages to having this updated list, and we're going to talk about those in the context of RTD on this next slide. There you go. So we have to trust the plan because it's our prioritized list of investments. So here we see where that sits. First and foremost, it's a primary output of our TAM plan, right? It's our action list. It's our action plan. So don't get me wrong, we don't strictly follow the plan blindly and do nothing else. But at this point in our maturity, we're much more aware of what we're saying no to, and when approving other initiatives, like the impacts that's going to have, right? It's that old saying of follow the money, right? If we follow the money, you can see what's most important to your agency, right? Second, this next item here, it's this list of shovel-ready projects. Like other agencies, we were able to actually capitalize on some of the shutdowns or reduced service levels, and we were able to execute some infrastructure upgrades because we had track access that we just hadn't had before then, right? So our AMP was leveraged to do that. We also used this list to assist us in looking for some grant opportunities because we have a prioritized list of needs, a capital needs inventory. Then we could go out and look for what grants align with the things that we need to do at RTD. This gives us that prioritized list of investments, and it was created collaboratively. So we did this using cross-functional teams of asset stewards. So all the different groups across the agency, and we do that with one step below the senior leadership team. So one step closer to the front lines allows us to really understand those assets better. And then we actually updated our fiscal policy for the entire agency in 2020, and it now references the TAM plan as we give priority to asset renewals over expansion. And this was kind of a huge win for us, right? This points everything back to that TAM plan. So this brings me kind of to the story of how we leveraged our plan to maintain the momentum kind of in the middle of this crisis. So if you take away one thing from this story, it's trust the plan. So next slide. So how do we leverage our plan? I think 2020 could be summed up in these 5 steps, right? We did some revenue projections early on, and we found the district was like $266 million shortfall just to fund the year. So shortly after that was identified, our CEO at the time put together this COVID fiscal sustainability task force. So I'm going to generalize here, but the primary purpose of the task force was to figure out what to cut from the budget. Our options were, I'm sure, similar to some of the options that your agencies faced. Do we cut service? Do we cut asset renewals, maintenance, replacements, administrative overhead? Do we take kind of a cut across all of those? But only one of these areas at RTD had a recently refreshed and trusted plan, right? Like I mentioned, we had just finished updating our 2019 TAM plan in October, so about 5 months prior to COVID taking effect. So we were able to leverage kind of this trusted plan that we had created and updated, and we did all that planning during a much less stressful time. I like the saying that luck happens when preparation meets opportunity. I think that fits really well here. So the agency was able to use that prioritized list of investments to easily identify which assets we could defer and which assets still remain top priority, right? Because we had done all that work ahead of time. So, were there adjustments to the plan? Absolutely, because I can assure you that our plan was not optimized for a pandemic, right? But we only had to make some tweaks based on what things actually had changed, and it didn't throw our plan out the window, right? So kind of this next one is on to other matters. Now that the task force was able to focus on some of the more difficult topics like furloughs and layoffs, it was partly because we had a pretty good grasp on our assets so that we didn't have to try and manage all the different moving pieces at once. We kind of had a plan we could just lean on there. So, but why were folks here willing to trust the plan? It's for the same reasons we covered in the previous slide, right? We used a management system framework. We followed the FTA guidance. That having that management system framework allowed everyone here to understand the people, the processes, the systems that we use to create our plan, right? That the creation of this plan was transparent, right? So people knew like how the sausage was made. It wasn't perfect, right? But they understood what they were getting, right? We've talked about this several times, this continual improvement. People understand that we've taken significant steps to make the plan more accurate or to create a higher resolution. I like to think about it as you have a really low resolution image, highly pixelated. Well, as we move this plan forward and we continue to iterate and take that generational approach, we're adding resolution so that picture comes into focus. And that eliminates that feeling of burden that everything has to be perfect before we can make progress. That gives us momentum, right? That we can keep moving forward even when things aren't perfect because we're going to keep making those little ratchet clicks to advance. So generally speaking, we have a plan for our assets. It made the 2020 experience here less eventful. It's not that it wasn't hard. And again, we had to make some tweaks kind of on the fly, but we didn't abandon our plan or throw it out the window, right? We trusted the plan. So let's now talk about maybe a couple of key takeaways from this. The next slide. I like this slide. First and foremost, the TAM fundamentals didn't change. Our needs, they just outpace our resources, and they always have. So logically, this means we need to be more strategic in the use of our available funding. And strategic really means that decisions are now, they're good for current us and future us, right? We understand the trade-offs and optioneering or the choices that we're making between these decisions, that we're able to systematically manage backlog as part of our objectives for the agency. Perhaps even more critical, nationwide, we can start looking at this backlog. So objectives didn't change. Sure, the constraints tightened, but our purpose is simple. We just move people from where they are to where they need to be. Last but not least, work your plan, stay focused. Everything else is a trap, right? Distractions are waiting on every corner. Having a plan really helps us focus on our purpose and our objective. It keeps us from moving away from what we need to do, and it keeps us moving forward, right? Momentum. So everyone knows I can't do a presentation with at least one analogy. So TAM plans are very similar to farming. We have an idea of what we'd like to accomplish, or in this case, kind of what's the harvest we want, right? We follow best practice. We start out from seeds. Our plan tells us when to plant, how much water, you get it, right? But then there's care and feeding. This is just working that plan. We just stay in focus. We need to look over our plants. We need to keep an eye on things. Then at some point, you do a harvest, right? Sometimes the harvest is really good, and sometimes the harvest wasn't what we expected, right? When either of those happen, we can go back and we can say, let's make adjustments. Let's start this process over, right? Rinse and repeat. So I'm sure you get it. You can't go out and randomly spread some seeds around, do nothing for a year, and come back and have something good. And it's the same for our TAM plan. And again, on this next slide, I won't be redundant. We can kind of move forward, but that at RTD, we were able to maintain momentum during a crisis because we had a solid plan. People trusted the plan, and we were able to use it at a time when things were pretty chaotic here, and I'm sure they were at your agency too. This very last slide, I just want to say thanks for your time today. And most important, I want to thank all the hardworking people on the asset management team. Everything that you see, all the good work that's done here at RTD is because we have a great team. It's not because of me. So that's it. Thank you again.
So I'm Paul Poddle. I'm with Casco Bay Lines, and I thank everyone for joining this webinar and listening to what it's like to maintain your momentum with your TAM plan. Before I share a little bit about our plan and how we're maintaining that momentum, it'd be nice to know a little bit about who we are, because we're a little bit different operated than probably a lot of you, where we operate a ferry service. Next slide. So currently, Casco Bay Lines, we service 6 year-round islands in Casco Bay, and we service a 7th one seasonally. And the type of people that, we have the residents of the islands, we have tourists that visit, we have visitors that are out there for day trips or whatever, or maybe visiting family and friends. We have contractors, businesses. We also provide the mail service for all these island communities, as well as we transport their kids to and from the mainland to attend schools. And then you have the commuters. Everybody who lives on these outer islands can actually ride our ferry, get in and work a job on the mainland and get back home at night. So on top of the people that we serve, we also serve their goods and services. Hardly anything goes out to these islands without going through our service. So our service becomes vital to the livelihood of these various communities. Next slide, please. So to understand us a little bit, you might need to understand how we're organized. We have a 12-member board of directors. 10 of them are elected from the islands that they live on, and 1 is appointed from the city of Portland, and 1 is appointed by the state of Maine. They serve for 3-year terms, and so under that, we could have upward of 3 to 4 new members on any given year. The board that we have sets our policies and helps to set priorities and focus for the district. On top of our board, we're also set up under special and private laws for the state of Maine. And because of this setup, we have certain activities that are governed by the Public Utilities Commission, making us a little probably unique to most. On top of that, because we operate a ferry service, we come under the U.S. Coast Guard jurisdiction. And because of the marine facility and the nature of what we do, we also come under Homeland Security, requiring us to have a security plan in place that's approved, and that has to be adaptable for the various threat levels that might be encountered from time to time. And because we get a lot of our capital asset money from Federal Transit Administration, we also have to meet their rules and regulations as well. So next slide, please. So we're a small operator. We're tier 2. We only have 5 revenue vehicles, but they are very large and very expensive revenue vehicles. We have 5 ferries. One's a passenger vehicle ferry. 3 of them are passenger freight type ferries with some very limited vehicle service. And then the 5th one is mainly a passenger with some limited freight that acts as our spare vessel. On top of our ferries, we also have freight equipment. Because of the freight that we move to the islands, we need to have a number of items like cranes and forklifts and pallet jacks and a variety of carts and other loading apparatuses in order to be able to manage that. Next slide. Because we are a ferry service, it's not uncommon for our terminal or our mainland facility to have several vessels at the same time that are getting prepared to load. Our vessels carry 399 passengers on top of vehicles and freight. And so it's not uncommon, and especially in our summer months or our busy months, that we could have upward of 1,000 people or more waiting to get on the ferries and as many getting off the ferries, making for a very crowded site. And on top of that, we are trying to deal with freight movements and vehicle movements and just people that are coming to the waterfront to enjoy getting access to the water. So this requires us to have fairly good waiting areas as well as a good freight system. And it also means that we have to rely on the equipment that we have so that it doesn't break down. On top of our terminal facility, we operate to piers. I'm sure many, especially the bus type operations, have their own terminals as well as bus stops. Our stops are pretty extensive. We need a pier that we can take a couple hundred ton boat into and run into it several times a day. And we have to operate over a tidal range that changes 14 feet or up to 14 feet twice a day. And we do that 365 days a year. So it's a difficult thing, and these are very complex and very expensive facilities. Next slide, please. So we found we needed to break our assets down. We couldn't leave the assets as just the 5 ferries because the ferries have a 30-year life, and with that 30-year life, you wouldn't necessarily ever get around to looking at it. But there are components within the ferries that are expensive, and some of them not so expensive, that break down or need to be replaced on a much more frequent basis than that. And so we had to break our assets down. So the ferries we broke down into things like our main engines, our gearboxes, generators, radars, radios, elevators and lifts, and the various controls that we have, so that we could track some of those things. Because if some of these things break down with our Coast Guard requirements, we're not able to operate. We'd have to tie up a ferry, and without having a lot of excess capacity, it could be detrimental to the communities that we serve. Next slide, please. So along with breaking down the ferries, we also broke down the piers. The piers break down into things like fender systems, and we have movable gate ramps that help us accommodate the tidal cycles that we have to deal with. That creates motors and pumps, depending on the type of system that we have. We have vehicle transfer bridges. None of these are inexpensive, and they require a lot of maintenance and activity. To go along with them, we have our freight equipment. We have things like cranes and forklifts. 2 of our vessels have cranes on them in order to manage the freight movements that we do. And so as a result, we have to maintain those if we want to be able to provide those goods and services to the island along with the people that we serve. So all of these things are essential to our ability to support the island communities. Next slide. So as we broke our plan down, we had to really kind of hone in on our focuses so that we'd be able to use this plan. Just developing it because it was a requirement wasn't going to be good enough. We wanted to have something that would actually be a tool that would help us in our day-to-day operation. So we needed a document that was simple and understandable. We have a lot of different people that have different focuses. And so we use this as a tool to educate our board members, and we also use it as a tool to inform our staff of our condition and things that they may need to do and to help direct attention into the appropriate focus. We also use our plan to help us develop our short-term and long-term capital projects. Like everyone else, we have more needs than we have resources, and it's easy to start to lose sight of some of the things that might be important. But the plan that we have helps to refocus those so that we're not going after things that are not as critical as some others. Along with that, we have changing members, whether it's a changing board member or you may have a changing staff member, and to help educate them and to bring them up to speed on what we do and what we have and how critical it is and why we do the things we want to do. The plan helps us to be able to do that. And then with the various entities that have oversight over us, it helps us to do the appropriate reporting or provide the information that they need in order for them to continue to have some confidence that we're operating safely and that we can provide that reliable service. Next slide. So how do we use it? I think probably the best way would be to give you a couple of examples of how we've been using our plan. Casco Bay Lines has been very fortunate that over the years we haven't had a big turnover in our staff, and people come and they work for us for long periods of time, which is good. And it allows us to, rely on their experience and their familiarity with the operation. But as with all things, you are going to get changes in staff and things are going to be different. So one of the examples, we have a new maintenance manager that came on board a little over a year ago. And this person, even though he was trained, really did not have ferry service experience and didn't have the experience that was necessary or for the things that we did. He has the marine training and stuff and worked in the ocean and on marine vessels, and but just really was going to have a hard time coming up to speed on where we were with our assets and their condition. By using our plan, we were able to help educate this new maintenance manager. He was able to look at the plan and see what we had for assets, to see the condition that they were in, to see what was coming up for potential needs in terms of replacement or repair or overhauls. And it also then allowed him to start to prioritize how he used his staff and how to prioritize their work efforts and trying to keep things moving forward. And then because of the Coast Guard requirements and our certification, we have to dry dock our vessels every 2 years. And while we have them in dry dock, that's when we try to focus our attention on major end work items that we wouldn't normally do while we're under operation. And so this helped him to be able to prioritize the things that should be in some of those work elements as we were getting ready to dry dock the vessels this last year. Next slide. Our next example would be, hang on this slide, go back. The other example is our board members. I mentioned to you before that we could have at least 3 members changing out, maybe even 4 in any given year. And when that happens, when new people come on, they have new priorities, they have new vision that they would like to share, and they tend to want to sometimes head us in a different direction. And we are able to use the plan to help educate board members and to let them see those things that are necessary. Now, we're not opposed to new direction and new visions because that's good for growth within the organization. But at the same time, We need to maintain what we're doing, and in order to do that, we can't lose focus on what's important and what those asset needs are going to be. So we use this to help in the training of and educating our board members as they come on board. Along with these things, we also, like I said, we use it for our short range and long range planning. It's really easy when you have more things to do than what you have funding to do it with, to really sometimes focus on the easy things. But by using our plan, we can focus on the things that are probably most important rather than what we consider maybe the low-hanging fruit. Next slide, please. So up to this point, Casco Bay Lines has been a kind of a paper logs and paper record type of company. And we've kept track of all of our activities and relied on the experience of the people that we had and the paper records that we kept in the logs. And even when working with the Coast Guard, you know, we would go back and pull out logs, or whether it's a vessel log or a maintenance log or whatever was necessary. The TAM plan gave us a place now to capture all of this data and retrieve it, not only by staff, but by those that might want to know exactly where we stand with any particular vessel or components of a vessel. So due to the Coast Guard requirements for us to dry dock every 2 years, this became extremely important so that we could focus on the right things to maintain and keep our certificates of inspection. Without these, we're not allowed to operate. It's during this time that it's most effective to look at the major replacements and the overhauls that need to be done. And the TAM plan helps us to identify those things and put them in our contract and make sure that they're accomplished when the dry dock period is in progress. We also found that for the convenience of having the plan led us to want to go to an automated system. With our new manager coming on board and looking at the plan and the stuff that we'd already gathered, it was suggested that we should adopt a PM software system, which would give us some electronic records and the ability to track and schedule tasks electronically and automatically. It also lets you track and see what the condition is, and we could tie it partially to our financial system. Next slide, please. So we operate in an extremely harsh environment, and based on our work efforts and the experience of the staff and things that have taken place over time, we built into our TAM plan the reaction that we get on certain equipment with this harsh environment. We were able to somewhat predict failures before they occur. And because the last thing that we want to do, especially with many of the features that we have, if they break down, we have to tie the vessel up. We don't want the breakdowns. We'd rather replace something before it breaks down in order to maintain the Coast Guard compliance and keep our certifications. So we've built those into our TAM plan. So that's why we broke our asset, or the major asset, down into a lot of sub assets within the boat. And some of those things are not very expensive ticket items, but they're very required in order for us to operate. A good example of this would be our radars, or any of our electronic controls or radios. We can't leave the dock if they're not operational. And these pieces of equipment, they don't seem to care how many hours they operate as much as the amount of time they've been in this environment. And so our TAM plan doesn't just look at hours, it looks sometimes at just length of time, depending on what that piece of equipment is. But that's what has made it a valuable tool for us so that we can avoid having to deal with a crisis. Next slide. So how do we integrate it? I was explaining to you just a moment ago about our preventive maintenance system and the software system and how we utilize it. The system helps us to track many of the things that are important and that are in our TAM plan. And it was pursued based on that value. Even when we brought the PM software provider on board, we shared with them our TAM plan, which gave them valuable information to build this system for us. We're still in the early stages of trying to utilize this system, so it's still new to us, but it helps us to identify tasks, make staff assignments, track work progress or what's been completed or where it is in the progress. It gives us some accountability with the financial system. It also helps to establish future maintenance activities and intervals, and it allows us to pre-schedule them way out. And it keeps electronic records, and we can tie it back. We use it to tie it back into our TAM plan. Next slide. So the TAM plan helps us to capture a variety of things, especially the capital cost. If you're in our plan, you're going to see the asset and the year it needs to be replaced, and then it's got an estimated replacement cost. This is so that when we're planning and we know what we might have for funding, we're able to try to maximize the number of things that need to be done, or it may tell us that we need to seek additional funding for a particular activity if we want to avoid some sort of crisis management mode. Excuse me. So we use it to capture capital costs. We use it to help plan our future budgets and funding allocations. We also use it to assist us in the development of the PM software system, as I was explaining. We use the data to assist us in yearly reporting to a variety of agencies, whether it's the NTD or to the Coast Guard, or what we may have to report just to our own board and keeping our board satisfied. And eventually, we hope to be able to tie our TAM plan in with our PM software plan so that the two work hand in hand and one can populate the other. My last slide, please. So the TAM plan works for us. We've been able to maintain good momentum as it works. Our plan is still a work in progress and probably always will be a work in progress. It always needs to be massaged. It needs to be looked at. But our plan is it's a tool for tracking. It's a way to prioritize our work. It's a means of educating, and we found that to be very valuable over this last year, especially. And it's a way to maintain a good state of readiness. It helps us to avoid breakdowns and dealing with the crisis. I can tell you right now, when you've got hundreds of people living on an island or thousands of people living on an island, if your vessel breaks down and you're not able to get them what they need or get them on or off the island, it's not a good day for anybody involved. So we make our TAM plan work for us. Hopefully you can make your TAM plan work for you. And thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Lou, for those excellent presentations. We now have about 15 minutes left to take a few questions. Again, we will be joined now by Hank Berg as well, the General Manager of Casco Bay Lines. And if you would like to ask a question, please just type it into the Q&A box, and we will review it and publish those we have time to get to. The first question we have, and this one would be directed at both of you. Maybe I'll direct it to you first, Paul, and then maybe switch to Lou. They say, I am tasked with updating our TAM plan annually. Once it is complete, I have a hard time getting my colleagues in procurement, maintenance, etc., to actually refer to the plan and use it. Do you have any suggestions?
Without knowing your colleagues, I'm not sure that I could probably answer that adequately. I know for us, as we were developing the plan, it wasn't developed by just me or one person. We're a small organization and everybody wears multiple hats in our organization. But in order to have buy-in, sometimes it's nice to have people that have some activity in the development of that plan, because if they help put it together, they'll probably help want to use it to see the fruits of their labor. So I worked closely with the existing maintenance manager at the time when we did it, as well as our operations manager and the general manager and our financial manager. So all of the key people that could benefit from the plan were involved in part of the process. And then once we had the plan in place, we had certain people buy into it, and they signed off on the document. Those people that I just mentioned, as well as our board president and our board treasurer, so that everybody was involved, engaged, and felt part of the process. And I think that helped them want us to succeed and use the plan in an appropriate way. And we have.
Yeah, so I'm just going to really follow Paul's lead there. I think it is really important that we have coordination in the development of the plans, right? It has to be our plan, it has to be their plan. So we do that through we have this asset management working group. So that's kind of the stewards or the owners of all the different asset classes. We do these monthly meetings and a quarterly report out to the board, and one to our asset management accountability team. So that allows us kind of this consistency in messaging and communication that reminds everybody that we have coordinated activities that produce a prioritized list, and that everyone understands how those lists were prioritized, right? Because within each asset class, they prioritize their list. Then we come together as the asset management working group, and then we prioritize across the groups, and then that output goes to AMAT. So everyone kind of feels like their voice was heard, and that their concerns and their challenges were understood, and that we always have winners and losers, because we've talked about it, like the resources don't match the need, but everyone sees how it was developed. And then our finance group really backs that up, because they say, if there's a project that's a renewal or a replacement, it comes through the AMP. Like, that's the method for that to happen. And since that process has really been formalized, everyone's on board. Otherwise, you just get another, kind of silo of excellence, right? You get an asset management team that's producing something, putting it on the shelf, and then everybody just looks at it and no one uses it. So that's my kind of 2 cents on that. It's a challenge.
Thank you, Lou. That silo of excellence is a great turn of phrase I'll have to remember. The next question we have is specifically directed at Casco Bay. How do you expect the addition of a hybrid electric ferry to impact the asset management, maintenance, and purchasing programs that you have? Will it be a big change or easy to roll into the current system?
I'll take a stab at it, because until we actually bring that asset online, we may have to make some adjustments. But I think the way our plan is set up, and the way we'd even look at this new hybrid ferry, is it's going to fall right into the plan, just the way we have it, because there'll be some new pages and some new focuses. There are some things that we won't have the experience with, that will take some time, and that's why the plan's always a working plan and not just a document that says this is hard and fast rule. We may have to make adjustments over time, and then we will tie it in also with our PM software system. That provider's already been made aware, and so they'll be ready for it. And the team that we're working with will also be performing some monitoring and activities for us that I think will help us as we move forward with making sure that we're able to look at it and apply it to our TAM plan, apply it to our PM software, and try to avoid any breakdowns before they occur.
Thank you, Paul. The next question is directed specifically at RTD. Lou, we noted that you have this annual process for updating your TAM plan, and the question from Sharon Okoy is, did you develop a formal process for this in order to update your TAM plan on this annual basis?
Yeah, we did. So it's part of our midterm financial plan. So kind of we do a 6-year rolling investment plan for the organization, and so our AMP is, or our TAMP is synced up with that. So we're always adding that 6th year. That way, we're coordinating those activities. We're sliding everything in place, and we just follow our process. It's really not all that exciting. It's kind of how we think it should be.
Well, thanks, Lou. We have 2 more questions here. I'm going to combine them. We have a couple of people asking each of you all about your project management software that you're using. They're curious what software you're using. Is it integrated into your TAM plan process? And specifically for Paul, the question was, how long did it take you to move from paper to a digital process using some kind of software? So maybe we could start with Paul.
Okay, well, the PM software, it's a preventive maintenance software as a system. And so we went through an RFP process to bring on a firm that provides this. And we look for those that specialize in our type of environment, or marine environment, working with ferries and the type of assets that we have. And we're still in the process of integrating that right now. But their actual efforts to get the first rollout of our first vessel took 3 or 4 weeks, using our TAM plan and then some on-site visits and working with our maintenance manager and staff. And right now we're going through various training trials before we make it go fully live. But I think at this point they've got most of our assets in the PM software system. And we only started this back about 3.5 months ago. So it's a fairly, for the big change that we're going through, it's a pretty rapid process. In terms of project management software, we don't have a project management software system. So a lot of that right now is still dependent on our experience, and that lies with me. That may be something that we tackle before I hang up my working hat here at Casco Bay Lines. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, so we're pretty tool agnostic here at RTD. So my general caution for everybody is that you don't want to automate an immature process. So it's really key to understand it, or have a thorough understanding of what it is your business is doing and what it is you want to come out of this black box. So we do use a work order management tool that we've had for a number of years. Actually, since 2007, we use Trapeze EAM. It's just work orders, digital, and then we have some other Microsoft business intelligence kind of tools, and we kind of pull everything into a data warehouse so that we can use it. But actually, a lot of our AMP and some of those other things, we find having an output into something that people are really familiar with, into something like Excel, is helpful. But that, there's so much more than just this plan or a tool, and you really have to understand what I think we're too quick to look to tools for the answer, and you can't buy your way out of this, right? It's just tough. It actually requires people to be thinking and working with these things. I think it's too easy to believe that there's some tool that you just buy and it will solve all of our problems, right? It's kind of the culture of the industry right now, that you can just buy a tool that says asset management in the title, and somehow that will deliver it for us. And I don't see that. All of our tools are good, but we could do the same thing with any tools.
Thank you. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention to everyone that the slides here are available on the TAM webpage, but they're being updated. There was an error with how they were posted earlier. It has now been corrected, but it may not update for another 30 minutes or so. So if you would like to download this presentation, please go to the TAM webpage and you will find them there. This presentation will be recorded and available online within a couple of weeks as well. So with that, I'd like to say a big thank you for our presenters and just give you all a quick 30 seconds or a minute each for anything you'd like to say to wrap up, perhaps starting with Paul.
Yeah, about the only thing I can say is that hopefully you can get people not to treat your TAM plan as a requirement and treat it more as something that can help you out. If you can do that and you can then focus on what your true needs are, then make the plan work for you. It's one thing to check the boxes and to do the things that they tell you that you have to do, but if it doesn't work for you, then you haven't really gained a whole lot. So we made our plan, we adapted it to fit our needs. We're unique. I tried to explain that to you, and I think, we make the plan work for us. And I think if you can do the same thing with your own plan, make the plan work for you and you'll find success with it. Thank you.
Yeah, I certainly can't add to that. The one thing I would say is that we're sort of as agencies, and we're all in this together, and that we can share a lot of resources that we're all working on, and these are all opportunities for us to make those connections and learn from each other. None of us have the answer. Everybody's better at something than we are. So the one thing I would add to maybe what Paul said is let's learn from one another, and so that we can all build better TAM plans, and then more people will use them and they'll deliver better results. And again, thanks to everyone for being here.
Thank you all for being here. This concludes our webinar, Maintaining MomenTAM. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar and hopefully at our TAM roundtable this summer. Again, please check out the webpage to save the date for that. Have a great rest of the day, folks. See you later.